What's up, everybody? It's Chris. Welcome to another episode of Not About Wrestling. And my guest today is Jamie Hemmings. Jamie is the book editor for Slam Wrestling. She's been a wrestling fan her entire life, ever since her aunt sent her VHS copies of Superstars of Wrestling and WWE's Saturday Night's Main Event when she was a kid, because she was in Canada and she couldn't get any shows on TV, so her aunt used to send her these VHS tapes. Became a huge wrestling fan, ended up going to school for journalism to write specifically about wrestling, and she's just a pretty cool woman. We have a great talk. We talk about, growing up a wrestling fan, how she kind of got bullied for being a wrestling fan, going to journalism school, once dressing up as Ric Flair to give a presentation in journalism school, which is amazing. She would deserve an A just for that. And we talk about a whole bunch of different things, and she actually breaks down the best wrestling books that every fan should read at least once. So without further ado, here's Jamie Hemmings. I'm here with Jamie Hemmings from Slam Wrestling. Slam Wrestling, I've been reading it since forever, and it feels like you've been there forever.
A little bit. I've been there since 2005. It's been there a lot longer than me, but yeah.
Okay, but I'm not saying that in a bad way. Like, I work in the same industry, and to be writing somewhere forever is a good thing.
It is, yeah. It feels like home, feels like a family. And now that we just this year after WrestleMania went on our own site. We used to be hosted by a news site. Mm-hmm. And now that we're on our own and I'm the book editor, also took that post on this year, just getting to know the writers a lot more, because we all knew Greg Oliver, the producer, and would kind of submit our articles to him. Everything went through him. But now getting to interact with the other members of Slam has been really cool, and seeing what we have in common, how we're different, and just that's been a great experience too.
What did you do for the website prior to being the book editor?
I did a lot of book reviews once I had my son in 2010. So and I was a stay-at-home mom after that too. So I was doing a lot more book reviews because it just worked better for my schedule. But I've done profiles, just all sorts of different wrestling stories. I did a lot of profiles when I first started in 2005. I think it was kind of just to see if you can handle doing different stories for Slam. But that's always kind of a good way to start, is just to interview some different indie wrestlers and write about them and stuff. But it's been a lot of lately, leading up to being a book editor, a lot of book stories, but I've kind of done a little bit of everything.
I think people don't understand that there are so many wrestling books out there that you do have to. I mean, people just, I guess it kind of slips under the radar a little bit, how many wrestling books come out, and not just biographies. Like, there are books about, the territory days and all different things like that. So let's backtrack a little bit before we get into the things you do today. How did you get into wrestling?
So I grew up in a really, really small town in Saskatchewan in Canada. I'm Canadian. I live in the US right now, but I am Canadian. And we had two channels growing up. And one was like the local channel that kind of had, local people on TV. And one was a national Canadian channel. So we didn't have a lot of fun shows. Like, they were okay, but nothing really crazy or anything or that entertaining, especially for a child. So my aunt, who lived in British Columbia, would send VHS tapes of cartoons, and she sent with one parcel a tape that all had wrestling on it. And it had Superstars of Wrestling, and it had Saturday Night's Main Event. And this was the lead up to the Mega Powers explode. And Miss Elizabeth had to choose which corner she was going to be in, either Macho Man or Hulk Hogan for WrestleMania V. And that was my introduction. And I just couldn't get enough. I was hooked. Like, I'd never watched it before. Like, I think my dad and my brother, I have a younger brother, would watch it if they could find it. And I didn't have an interest, but seeing that and just, it was just sparkly and it was just amazing and just dramatic. So I was into it.
Was it the struggle between the Mega Powers themselves, or the struggle for Miss Elizabeth? What was kind of the...
I was drawn to her because I'm very much an introvert and a quiet person. I'm a bookworm, hence being a book editor, perfect role. So just to see someone like her who is just so quiet and kind of shy as well, and just had this amazing, like, just was beautiful and graceful, and people still people still were attracted to her, and she resonated with so many people. Like, you didn't have to be loud and flashy to get noticed, and that's why I really was drawn to her. And then she, had to make this decision, and she was all there, all demure and not wanting to, not wanting to choose, because she had affections for both men, different, of course, between Macho Man and Hogan, but she cared about them both, and just the tension, and of course Macho Man being upset when she didn't choose either of them. She was in a mutual corner.
Did you find yourself watching the same videotape over and over again?
Oh yeah. Oh, I have, like, and especially Macho Man stuff. Like, I have seen, even though Macho Man and Elizabeth were married before their wedding at SummerSlam, I have watched that wedding. I could probably do the commentary if you turn it down. Like,
Really?
I could do Bobby Heenan, I could do Roddy Piper, I could do Gorilla Monsoon, I could do the whole thing, commentative of the wedding, and just the music video that played beforehand. I know it all.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Did it have any influence on you when you planned a wedding or anything? Or
A little bit, because I wanted to get married in a wrestling ring. I thought that would just be spectacular. And I'm been married to my husband Martin since, when did we get married? 2008.
okay.
And he said, absolutely no way, no. And so as a compromise, he made our wedding cake, and it is a wrestling ring, and we're in the middle of a wrestling ring. And I had a mentor in wrestling named Bob Leonard, who has kind of done everything but wrestle. Most notably, he's no longer with us. He passed away a few years ago, but he was really known for his photography. And he also, where I used to live in Saskatchewan, where I went to university and where I was living for quite a while, they had an indie wrestling league that was High Impact Wrestling. I don't think that they're around anymore, but Bob would do the announcing. So on the side of our wedding cake is this little table, and it said reserved for Bob Leonard, and he was still alive at our wedding, and I presented it to him at our wedding. So
That's very sweet. Is your husband a wrestling fan at all?
he kind of has to be, because, like, he knew of people, like, before we got together. Like, I just learned actually this year, he's always kind of been fascinated with the bushwhackers, which I had no idea. And because he's also my husband's kind of a neat freak. And I was like, they licked people, right? Like, they would just walk up and lick fans. And he just thought they were, like, hilarious and really enjoyed them. So, and he'll go to live shows. Like, we've gone, since we live in New Mexico, and we've been here 4 years, and we've been able to go to 3 house shows before COVID, of course. And he actually won one set of tickets on the radio, like, and he goes willingly and has a good time. He loves the hecklers in the crowd.
Okay.
He finds the fan comments and watching the fans probably more entertaining than the matches themselves. But, like, he doesn't know all the stats and everything, but he knows enough to follow along. And he loves the New Day. He loves that they
My
throw
kids love the New
pancakes and
Day.
dance
Yeah.
around. So yeah.
So your husband tends to lean to the more jovial, cartoonish type.
Yeah, like, I don't think he's a fan of the Fiend or anything.
Yeah. Now, did you break the news to him that prior to being the Bushwhackers, they were the sheep herders who were very bloody, violent, kind of?
Oh, I don't know if I told him. That's a good
Yeah.
point. And now you've ruined it. No, I haven't really talked to him about that. Yeah.
Yeah, you should say, do you want to see the early Bushwhacker stuff when they were the sheep herders, and show him some of the more violent stuff that they do, just to get his kind of like gauge?
I should. Well, there's a autobiography is coming out. John Crowther, who's done a lot of comic books for wrestling, for Squared Circle Comics is the name of the publications, or the publisher, sorry. And he's working with the Bushwhackers doing an autobiography. And I kind of thought it might be interesting if my husband and I wrote the article, because my husband's such a fan, kind of like a he said, she said. So that's kind of what I'm thinking. And so maybe I was kind of going to wait to tell him about the sheep herder stuff. Maybe that was probably my thinking, because I haven't mentioned it to him, but that might be an interesting thing for him to comment on when the book comes out.
So your exposure to wrestling was when you were young. How was it received, a young girl liking wrestling?
Not well. I was bullied severely as a child, unfortunately. And one of the things I was bullied about was liking wrestling. Like, and that's kind of how I found out about kayfabe. I was so invested in wrestling, had no idea. And then kids started talking about it. And I actually I was pretty naive. And I actually had to have that conversation with my dad, and he had to break it to me that it wasn't real. And like I was probably, like probably 8, like
Mm-hmm.
7 or 8, like when not long after I started watching, but it was not received well. And I know even my own mom was probably like, she didn't discourage it, but she kind of thought, oh, this will be something she grows out of.
Mm-hmm.
And, and I would want to do it, something to do with wrestling for school projects and reports, and the teachers would kind of roll their eyes. And, it just wasn't like, and I would tell people, well, I want to be a wrestling journalist when I grow up. And they're like, that's nice. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's not going to happen. There's no such thing. And then, as I got older, I got to, when I went to journalism school, we got to do a report on our favorite journalist. And I picked a wrestling journalist who was, you know him, I'm sure, Dave Meltzer.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody else is doing, like some kind of columnist from the paper or true crime or investigative reporter. And I'm like, I had all the newsletters of the Observer newsletter talking about Dave Meltzer. Like this job does exist. Pro wrestling journalism does exist. So
Do you think it would have been easier as a kid if the women's division existed back then the way it does today?
yes, because all we kind of had, I didn't get to see very many women's matches until later. And then kind of when like, of course, Trish Stratus and Lita were great examples, but then that was also the getting into the Attitude Era where we had a lot of pillow fights,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Yeah.
and things like this. And there was some wrestling prior to, before I got into wrestling, or there was some women's wrestling rather prior to me getting in. So maybe if it, like, I was just at the wrong time when I
Mm-hmm.
first got into it. So there wasn't, like, I don't even remember, like you would have had like Moolah and Wendy Richter and that. I kind of just missed that when I got
Mm-hmm.
into. So yeah.
So you're talking like mid to late 80s is when you kind of got into it.
Yeah, because it was 89 was WrestleMania 5.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
at that point, a lot of the female characters were like your Sensational
Yeah.
Sherrys, your Miss Elizabeths, more the valet. I mean, Sherry
And
wrestled.
but when I saw her wrestle, it was against Sapphire, and
Yes.
like it wasn't like of course now with YouTube and the internet, and that's the other difference here. We didn't have the internet when I first started getting into wrestling, and I can watch that stuff now and look at past matches, but that didn't exist, and you couldn't show it to people either. You can be like, look, women wrestle too, and you
Mhm.
just didn't have access to that.
Yeah, it had to be, I mean, hard. I mean, like, even as a kid, as a boy, I mean, there was boys that liked wrestling,
Mm-hmm.
but, it was kind of like, it wasn't the most popular thing in the world after a certain age. Like when kids were younger, but then when they started like getting clued in to what it was, like it wasn't as popular yet. I kind of still gravitated towards it. It's a hard transition for kids. It's kind of like letting go of Santa, you know.
This was more devastating finding out about the kayfabe
More
in that to
more
me.
devastating.
Yeah, yeah.
What was the most devastating part? Like what was the first thing that you when you found out that it wasn't real? Like what was the first moment where you thought, "Wait, so that's not real?"
Well, yeah, like Macho Man and Hulk Hogan don't really hate each other in real life. Like, well, I know they've had animosity
Yeah,
in real
right.
life, but and then I remember reading in the National Enquirer. This was a little few years after, but like it had talked about how Elizabeth and Macho Man had been married for years before, and I
Mhm.
was what? Like I thought this love story was unraveling before my eyes,
Mhm.
But just yeah, I think it was moments like that that just oh, like they're actually friends. And I also didn't have access to go see, I was like being in a small town, I didn't go see wrestling shows,
Mhm.
so I didn't see them traveling together, or traveling separate. Like I never saw any of that either, so it was just very strange, and I was very naive to it all.
I'm guessing wrestling never came to your town.
No, it came, the closest would have been to 2 hours away from where I lived was Regina, Saskatchewan, and that's where I went to university
Mhm.
as well. And there were some house shows that came there, and also we'd go every summer to visit family. We have a lot of family in British Columbia, so the first show I ever got to see was in Vancouver, British Columbia. My uncle arranged for us to go because he was really involved with recreation facilities. He actually would teach how to upkeep in different aspects of a recreation facility,
Mhm.
and he did a lot of behind the scenes stuff when WWF would come to Vancouver. So I got a lot of posters and autographs and things like that from him because once I got into it, and he arranged for us to go to a house show, and Hulk Hogan actually wrestled in the main event. And I was a big Hulkmania fan, and Macho Man unfortunately was not there, but I got to see Hulk Hogan wrestle. So at my first live show.
That your first live show was Hulk Hogan. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
I wasn't front row or anything. He
Nah.
got us some comp seats and we were like, way in the back, but it was still pretty cool when, I don't know how old I was. I was probably like, I don't even think I was a teenager yet going to see it. So it was pretty cool.
When you were a little kid, what was your reaction when the wrestlers were billed from Canada?
I think like I was a Bret Hart fan. I think like Bret Hart was a big deal because that's kind of how I met my mentor, Bob Leonard, because Bret was signing autographs in Regina, which was, like I said, 2 hours away. And it was before I had a driver's license and all that. And my parents just with their work schedule that they didn't have the time to take me. And I was upset about it. And I was cutting the grass of an elderly gentleman that was also a mentor to me. And he's like, why are you so upset? Because I was not hiding it. I was very upset that day. I couldn't go to Regina to go get Bret Hart's autograph. And he's like, oh, well, maybe my friend Bob Leonard can help. And I still have it in a photo album. Like Bob Leonard got my brother and I each a signed picture from Bret. So.
Wow, that's amazing. It's always amazing when you're into something and then a person who you never expect has like a connection to it.
I would have never thought, like I never talked wrestling with this guy. Like this guy we talked Shakespeare and Dickens, and because he was a big reader like I am. And actually when he passed away, I even got a whole bookshelf of his books, including the shelf. Like after like we would talk books, and he would always give me different. I would get like an Oxford dictionary or thesaurus from him every year. Like I'd never in a million years thought he'd know anything about wrestling. And Bob Leonard was one of his closest friends, and he's like right away, yeah, you should talk to Bob.
Wow,
it's really funny.
That's amazing. So you grew up. You didn't get much wrestling where you were. Did you get any wrestling mags or anything?
Surprisingly, like we had one grocery store and it had this tiny magazine rack behind the cashier, like on the other side. Like it was only like a quarter of what you'd see in like a regular store. And surprisingly, sometimes they would have wrestling magazines, like their Pro Wrestling Illustrated. Not always. I don't recall seeing the WWE magazine or WWF at the time, but it was a lot of Pro Wrestling Illustrated and ones like that. The I guess they call it the Apter mags, things
After
like
mags,
that.
Yeah.
But so I would have access because that was a huge resource. Like I said, we didn't have the internet, so that would just be my way of looking. Especially the only wrestling I would ever see on TV for the longest time was WWE, because it took a while for us to get the TBS channel on our cable. So then when I had that, I could watch WCW for a long time. The only thing I could see on television was WWE.
Yeah, I remember as a kid, I used to get a lot of the magazines. Like I'd go to the store, I'd get the PWI,
I'd buy whatever
stuff
they
like that.
had.
Yeah. And then I remember, and I was probably much older, probably maybe like my mid 20s. And I found out that like 99% of them were bullshit and all made up. And I remember being so crushed. I'm like, wait, so that's not real. Like I thought I was reading actual articles when really I was reading just made up stories about the wrestlers.
I think that was part of when you asked what was hard to deal with kayfabe. I think it was realizing the magazines too, because to me, they were kind of like newspapers.
Yes.
These wrestling magazines, and you're like, oh, okay. So it's not, it's kind of like they're telling stories, or like, like they can just make it up. They're most likely didn't even interview the wrestler they're talking about. They probably just made up the quotes.
Yeah, never. They would take pictures and like make stories up based on the pictures and things like that. So that kind of like crushed me a little bit. But then after a while, you just kind of like get over it and realize, okay, much of what we love is just as fictional as a movie would be.
It's escapism.
So you just got to take it. Yeah. So you just got to take it as that.
Yeah.
So you go to school, you get your journalism degree. Did you always wanted to be a wrestling writer? Is that what you went to get your journalism degree for?
Well, I basically I knew it was important to my parents, and it was important to me as well to get a degree. And I knew I liked to write. So I'm like, okay, I guess journalism. Like I didn't have visions of being like on the news behind the desk, reading the news out. Like I didn't feel that way, but I knew I liked to write. So I thought, and when I did have assignments for journalism school, I would use wrestling whenever I could. And much to the chagrin of some of the teachers and my fellow students, like, oh, wrestling again. But yeah, I think it was just because I like to write. And I thought, okay, what can I want to get a degree. So what is the best fit here? And in the journalism school, like you had to take radio, broadcast, and print, especially for the first year it was a 2-year program. You did 2 years prior in the university, and then you applied to the school. And the first time I applied, I didn't get in. So I had to wait another year
Mm.
And then I applied again and I got in, but the first year, until you're into your second year, then you can kind of more specialize if you want to, like, I preferred print. So I was like, nope, no more broadcast classes for me. But like the first year you had to take radio and broadcast as well.
Were any of your I'm sure that your papers were wrestling related.
Oh yeah.
Do you remember any of them?
Well, I wrote about Bob Leonard
Mhm.
for my final magazine class assignment. And actually that got printed on Slam as well.
Wow.
So, and actually Greg Oliver always puts me over and says that's one of his favorite pieces. And now that Bob is no longer with us, and the fact that Bob had intended to write a book but didn't get to write a book, I'm really glad that, because it was quite lengthy. If you do go look on Slam, like, make sure you have a few minutes to sit and read it, because it's quite lengthy, and it's a very personal piece about how much he meant to me and how much he loved wrestling as well, and other people. He really meant a lot to a lot of other people in wrestling too. So, but yeah, and even I even interviewed Bob. Was there, like, it was kind of, how can I put Bob Leonard in this class? And also I did a presentation on Dave Meltzer. We had to do a book report, and we were given a list of books to read, and Ric Flair autobiography had come out. And during university, I love to read, but because of the workload, I didn't have a lot of time to read like what I personally wanted to read. Like, it was a lot of textbooks or required reading. So I somehow convinced my prof at the time that I should do a book report, like, forgo the list you gave me, and I should do the autobiography of Ric Flair. So in order to kind of sweeten the deal, I dressed up as Ric Flair. I had this old ratty blue bathrobe, is the best I could do. And I found this blonde wig at my house. My brother and I lived together in an apartment. I don't know where this stupid blonde wig came from, and it was just horrible looking, but I put that on, had the robe. I came out, a friend of mine had put the entrance music on CD and walked out. And then I did my, my whole report dressed as Ric Flair. I had a friend of mine be like, "Are you sure you want to do this? You look really ridiculous," and stuff. But it was so.
And what grade did you get?
I think I had an A, like, I passed. Nobody.
I hope so.
Yeah.
The Ric Flair book, are you talking about the one by Keith Elliott Greenberg?
Yeah, the WWE one.
Yeah, I actually just interviewed him just about a month or two ago.
Did you just interview Keith?
Yes.
Yeah.
For his most recent book.
The Too Sweet book.
Yeah, which I cannot put over any more than I already do. Like, to anyone who's even close to being a wrestling fan, I'm like, just read it. It's an amazing book, and he's a really great writer.
I got to interview him for the first time this year as well, which was really cool, because I used to read. His name was quite memorable because it's so lengthy, Keith Elliott Greenberg. So I used to see that in WWE magazine, and so it was kind of like, I tried not to be a nerd about it, but it was really, I was like, it's Keith. Like, that's the kind of stuff I get excited about when it's like the wrestling journalists that you get to talk to, or the authors. Like, that to me is the more, like, yes, it's cool when you get to speak to a wrestler, but to me it's more like, I grew up reading this guy, it was so cool, and I just didn't want to be a nerd about it.
Well, sometimes, I mean, I have interviewed a lot of writers on this show, and I plan to in the future. And the reason I do is because I feel like they are a little bit more, like, I don't want to say excited, but when you ask them questions about the people that they've done biographies about, they're better with telling the stories because they haven't told them 7,000 times.
Yeah.
Whereas when you ask the wrestler, they're like, yeah, this happened. I just told this I just told this in another interview like 15 times just this week. And you also get like a different kind of look at the story from a writer's perspective.
Well, and they start out as fans too.
Yes.
And I mean, that's just, for me, it's easier to relate to them, because that's how I started, and that's how I'm still a fan. So that's to me why it's so exciting to talk to them. I mean, yes, any wrestlers, I welcome the chance to interview you as well, but it's just, it's so exciting to talk to the wrestlers and just their process of going about getting the story and getting the details from the wrestler that the book is about.
Rough estimate, how many wrestling books do you think you've read?
Oh gosh, at least 100.
Okay.
I don't know. So many. And there's some that I read that have already been covered in Slam. And there's some that have been covered by Slam that I still have to read. Like ones that I didn't do, of course. But there's just so many. And with self-publishing, there are so many wrestling books out there now. Like, it's just, when we moved to the new site, I had to move the old book stories onto the news site for Slam. And just even then I was sitting there taking notes of which ones I want to still read, because there's so many. There's so many out there.
In your opinion, what makes for a good wrestling book?
I think number one, the subject has to be willing to be vulnerable. If you're going to write a book, and I'm not saying you have to tell absolutely everything, because I understand that they're human and it's not easy to show all the parts of you, especially the not so shiny parts. So, but I do think there is this expectation of a tell-all, and if you aren't willing to go all the way in a tell-all, at least be vulnerable. I think honesty, I think you have to include like the big events. Like I'm just thinking like the Bret Hart book. Like if he wouldn't have talked about the death of Owen or the screw job, people have been like, what? Like you have to be willing to be honest. And I don't think it's easy by any means, but I just think definitely vulnerability.
Which, off the top of your head, which book did you find surprisingly good?
Well, I will always be a fan of Mick Foley's Have a Nice Day. That one, I think that was the first wrestling book I ever read. And then the next book I read, which is another one that I really like, although it's a hard read because it's a difficult subject, but I read the Dynamite Kid Autobiography. And I actually, like, I know there's a lot of people, or I know someone, his name is Jason Norris, and he edited an anthology called Women Love Wrestling. And he doesn't want to read the Dynamite Kid book because he's from the UK. And, you know, Dynamite Kid, British Bulldogs, they were held in such high esteem. So to read about a book where he's not so shiny, like all the edges are shown, and, you know, he wasn't that great of a guy. It's, you know, he doesn't want to take that journey, but I really appreciated the honesty in that story. And so I think the Mick Foley, I think the Dynamite Kid, another one I read that's really good. Another author based in the UK, her name is Heather von Vandenberg, and she wrote a book called Unladylike. And if you haven't checked that out, I really recommend it. She's just a girl who all of a sudden became a wrestler and wasn't really a fan, and just kind of got invited to do some wrestling training. And her first day of training, her and her friend showed up, and they didn't even have gym clothes, like workout clothes. So they just went in some pajamas and whatever they could find. And she knew nothing about wrestling. And there was one day of training that her trainer was saying, okay, he would yell out different names of famous wrestlers and you kind of had to imitate them. And he yelled out The Undertaker, and she didn't know who that was. And just this journey of her, you know, learning about wrestling and now becoming a wrestling fan and a wrestler too. It's kind of like what I think it would be like if I became a wrestler, except I'd have the wrestling knowledge, but I have no athletic ability whatsoever. So just her journey. And also she has some health issues that she talks about. And she also talks about kind of the problems with wrestling, like in terms of the stereotypical storylines, things like that. So it's just a well-rounded, I called it a feminist romp about wrestling. Like it's a great, great book. And it's different. It's not something you'd expect to see all the time.
That sounds pretty good. I'll have to check that out.
If you can make a book, if you can be vulnerable and kind of make it so something we don't quite expect, or add your kind of spin on it, it's a good thing.
Do you remember any books that you got done with and you were like, that unfortunately was not a great book?
I don't know if I ever be like, oh, that's not a great book. I like definitely disappointed.
Yeah, disappointed.
I remember reading the controversial Rocky Johnson book, and that was written by the late Rocky Johnson and Scott Teal, and that book was pulled from shelves, unfortunately. And I really like Scott Teal, and he's a great writer, but I just felt the book was very guarded. And I felt it was what Rocky Johnson wanted to present, the version he wanted to present to audiences. And I just, like I said, the vulnerability was missing. And not that you have to tell me all your secrets and your PIN number. I'm not asking for that, but just like let us in. And I got to interview Rocky like when the book came out. And he was very forthcoming and really great interview. And I was just like, man, like I just felt that part, like this forthcoming, charming guy was missing from the book.
Why was it pulled? I don't remember that one.
I don't know. There's some controversy over what, and again, the best people to talk about that would be Rocky, who unfortunately has passed away, and Scott Teal. But it looks like it originated with some money issues between the two. I don't know. This this was covered on Slam. There was a story, but I haven't spoken to Scott Teal about it. What all happened? I just something I noticed when I read the book is, and that I brought up is Rocky Johnson had, of course, he's the father of The Rock, but
Right.
he had his other children from
Mhm.
previous relationships, previous marriage, and those children weren't even identified by gender in the book. And I brought that up to Rocky Johnson, and he seemed very surprised. And I don't know if he knew that was how it was going to be, or if he's genuinely honest with me that was not his expectation, that he thought there'd be pictures of them in the book and everything of his other children. So I think there was multiple issues with the book, but I think it originated with some money issues.
So
And
it kind of sounds like Rocky Johnson spoke to the writer.
the ghostwriter, Scott Teal.
Book came out and like never really looked it over or kind of like checked it, and then there was discrepancies that he wasn't crazy about, and then it became a money thing.
No, I think the money thing was before.
Later? Oh,
I think
before,
there
okay.
was, I don't know if there was a formal contract. I think there was a discussion
Gotcha.
about what Scott wanted. And then
Got ya.
it doesn't look like Rocky fulfilled his
Got ya.
end of the bargain.
Mhm.
And then because of that issue, that sounds like that's like the main issue of why it
Mhm.
was pulled. But when I talked to Rocky, he told me he hadn't seen the book. But I don't know how much involvement. I don't know if he asked to see each chapter after it was written or anything like that. Like
Right.
that kind of stuff was still murky, and I never
Yeah.
kind of got a straight answer. And I even talked to the publisher, like, why isn't his other children named in the book?
Yeah.
Like, because his children on Facebook, his other children, like at least his other son was talking about the book and like, saying, hey, my dad's got a book out kind of thing. But I'm like, I don't know if he knows he's not mentioned at all by name in there. So
Interesting. I'm gonna have to look that up.
but it's pulled from shelves. Like if you want a copy, you'd have to go on eBay or something.
I'll contact my buddy The Rock and I'll ask him for it.
Yes, or you could go that way.
He might have an extra copy hanging around.
Or he might not want to give you a copy because it was pulled. So
probably not. Yeah. I'm sure it's somewhere hanging around the web. But I'd be more interested to learn the backstory of it than the actual read, like to go through.
Yeah, if you do go on slamwrestling.net, Greg Oliver does write an article about about the book being pulled, and it looks like what he says in the article is, of course, the money issue, and then he did talk to an ECW Press, that's the name of the publisher of the book,
right?
Off the record, and they kind of alluded there were other issues too. And I've heard things, but to say this is exactly what happened, I can't say that because there was just so much talk about this book. But I think, where does everything usually go wrong? Starts off with money.
Money, yeah. I'll have to check that out. One book that I read and I love the performer, but that I was slightly disappointed in was, I don't remember the exact name of it, but it was the Arn Anderson biography.
Oh, that one I haven't read. Okay.
So it was probably late 80s that it was published, and it was very much still in kayfabe. And he wrote it. I don't even know if he wrote it like he spoke like he was actually Arn Anderson. I'm sure I think he might have like said in the beginning that he was Marty Lundy, but he stayed very much in kayfabe, and it was kind of like, all right. And he like kind of got out a little bit, but now that I listen to the Arn Anderson podcast, he kind of still has trouble talking about.
I think you would, and I think that would be. I talked to the lady. I have a hard time pronouncing her name. It's Janine Mahoseth. She was Mad Maxine.
Okay.
Wrestled with. She was trained by the Fabulous Moolah, and she wrote, instead of writing an autobiography, she wrote a novel. And there's going to be a story. I've written the story. It hasn't been posted live on Slam yet, but it's coming. And for her, kayfabe was so ingrained with her. So that's why she wanted to do a novel. She felt queasy when the thought of doing an actual memoir autobiography. So I think just like Arn Anderson, I think it's ingrained, like kayfabe was the law, and it was serious when they first started wrestlings, and it for the majority of their career. So I think it's hard to turn that off.
Do you think that, I don't know how it works from publisher to publisher, but do you think when these wrestlers sit down and do this with someone, or even the ghostwriter or the co-author with them, do you think they say to them, you're going to want to be as honest as possible if you want this to be a bestseller, or if you want people to read this? Because I just don't know. Like, I don't know if not having
done a book myself either. Like, I hope people do, because if you're going to be in there, that was kind of mostly my issue with the Rocky Johnson book. Like, yes, all this controversy happened after, but to me, it was just, I just felt like this is like, it's still an interesting story to hear about how this guy came from really impoverished childhood and then was able to, become a famous wrestler, and also all the racism and things he endured. It's a compelling, interesting story, but there was just so much of it that was just kept under lock and key. I felt like just wasn't all there. Like, there was just like, it just need a little bit more. Like, just open up a little bit. Like, you don't have to, like I said, don't give me your PIN number, but a little bit more.
Then you have the opposite, and I found this in a bunch of books that I read, where it seems like the wrestler kind of overshares and overshares things that aren't really that necessary, where it's like 2 paragraphs on, well, I told the guy if he didn't give me $5, I was going to beat him up, and we went outside and I beat him up. And it's like, all right, does that really kind of move the story along, that you just told me that you randomly beat up a coworker for $5?
Well, and for me, an example of what you're saying is when they're like, and then I had sex with 5 ladies, like, it's just like, and the next night I had sex with 10. Like, oh, like, and I don't know if that's just a female perspective. Like, I don't, that's the only perspective I know when I'm reading a wrestling book. Like, I don't know if men read that book and are like, ugh, the same way I do. Like, I'm sure some men are like, yay, this is the best book ever. But I don't know. Like, that's just something I just noticed in my perspective with the oversharing. I'm like, oh, great. Another story of groupies. Yeah.
It's funny. I don't think I've come across a book that I've read with any of that in there. Maybe like a brief kind of in passing, but I don't remember any like groupie stories. That's funny. I guess I'm reading the right books. I guess I am reading the right books, because I'm not coming across that. So maybe I am.
I like, and I understand that's because I read a lot of autobiographies of rock stars. So I understand there's going to be groupie stories, but sometimes you're just like, oh, not again.
Well, that also seems like it's a known. Like, we know.
Excessive. Yeah, we get it.
We get it. Like, we assume that you had a lot of women. Like, we don't need to know.
You're famous and you had access to a lot of ladies. Yeah.
But I feel like they feel the need, they feel compelled, especially now when they're writing the book 30 years later, where that's not happening every day of the week. So they need to show, oh, I used to be like the chick magnet.
I used to be someone. Yeah.
So you've been writing online since 2005. How has wrestling coverage overall changed in those 15 years?
Well, I think definitely how women are portrayed. I mean, there's still some fans who are not fans of women wrestling, and then there's some that have become, there's some male and female fans that have become advocates for female wrestling. I think, to me, that's the big change, and maybe that's just me noticing, because again, I'm a female writer in a mostly male dominated area of writing, but just women's matches being taken more seriously. I never thought, I know WWE isn't as far along as they should be in the women's revolution, and they'd like to take credit and be like, look at what we did, when, okay, you're only doing it right now because it's profiting you. There's been all female promotions and that way before WWE decided to have the women's evolution. But I mean, I never thought I'd see just an all women's pay-per-view, which I thought would be an annual thing, but unfortunately they've only done once so far. And so that's definitely, and I mean, there's still a lot more to accomplish in terms of advocating women's wrestling. But when I first started watching, like we said earlier, I didn't get to see a lot of women's matches. I saw a lot of valets. And when I did see matches, it was in the Attitude Era, and there was a lot of women in those evening gown matches or pillow fights and things like that. So to me, that's probably the biggest change. And also people coming forward and admitting they're wrestling fans, because like I told you, that was something I was bullied for. And even as I got older and I had people who weren't kind of out when it came to saying they were a wrestling fan, and they would say, hey, I saw your article on Slam, and they'd send me an email. I just want you to know I'm a wrestling fan too. I'm like, where were you when I was 7 and getting picked on, but I think just the role of women and just people being okay and like shouting that they're wrestling fans, which I think is great.
I feel like, I mean, the WWE has come a long way with the women's wrestling. I feel like
Yes.
one place that they're lacking is, and this probably has something to do with it being a male-dominated writing room, but I feel
Mhm.
like the storylines are all like 2 or 3. It's like either we're best friends and we're no longer best friends,
Yeah.
or I'm the bigger girl bullying the little girl. Like they don't, their storylines are always the same 3 things. And sometimes it feels like some women are feuding and we don't even really know why they're feuding. Like they have,
Sometimes they're feuding over a man.
yeah, which
Yeah.
also gets old too. And it's
Yeah.
kind of just like, I feel like the women's division, like they need more stakes. Like there's got to be reasons why they're, you know, like a good example would be, so the women's Money in the Bank.
Yeah.
So the women win the Money in the Bank, and then it just kind of like it doesn't get as much exposure as the men's Money in the Bank. Like we saw Miz and Otis with that briefcase pretty much every week.
Yeah.
But it really took me a minute to, and I remembered that like Asuka won it this
Yeah.
year, right? And she had already cashed it in.
Well, Becky Lynch
Right,
left
gave it up.
because
Right.
she was pregnant, and then and she said, you also won this, and the belt was in this briefcase.
Right,
Yeah.
that's right. Okay.
Yeah.
So I feel like then at that moment there should have been another Money in the Bank. Like
Yeah.
add
would've
another
been great.
stake. Yeah, add another
Yeah.
stake. Like don't get rid of that. You already have like not enough storylines to go along for the women. Give them something else to fight over instead of like the bullying and the you're my friend, you're not my friend anymore.
Yeah.
You know, so I feel like where the women's wrestling has come a long way, the actual writing for the reasons that these women are wrestling for with each other is kind of way back.
And I think that's something that will change as the writing table at WWE gets more diverse. As you said, it's a lot of men on there.
Mhm.
So, and I think also maybe if Vinny let go of the control freakedness that he has a little bit, I think maybe we would get some more powerful stories, but I don't know.
Sometimes I wonder how accurate that is. Like I'm sure he still has the final say,
Yeah,
but I feel
that's
like
my guess too.
a lot of it is like things go wrong. They're like, well, Vince wouldn't let us do it, or Vince doesn't, you know.
It is an easy scapegoat. Yeah.
Yeah. But okay, so now along those lines, I don't know if you saw recently on Eric Bischoff's podcast 83. Oh no, I'm sorry. It wasn't on 83 Weeks. He did an interview with Digital Spy.
Oh, I didn't see that.
Yeah, so he said one of the reasons that it didn't work out with the WWE is because when you get to some place, you feel like you're going to be bringing these fresh new ideas and hopefully something happen, whereas in the WWE, it's just new people doing the same things that they've always done all the time.
I think that's very accurate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how much could you get all this new stuff out there if it's just, so it's these people who, so it might not be Vince, but it's the Vince learning tree of all these people that are like, this is the way we do it, and we're just going to do it the way that Vince did it. And, you know, it's just kind of, you're never going to change. The only person who's kind of progressive, not really too progressive, is Triple H, because Triple H just kind of took what was working on the indies and made NXT technically like WWE's indie.
Yeah.
You know, in a way.
And I always enjoy the NXT pay-per-views more.
I do too.
That's always like, I find myself like having a reaction when I'm watching it. Like I will gasp. I'll be like, oh, like I'll be, not that I don't have reactions when I watch like say TLC the other night, but it's such a, I don't know. It's just fresher. It's just more exciting. And I think it reminds me of when I've gone to indie shows, which I miss so much now with COVID, but yeah.
Yeah. And it's because NXT, like I said before, they have stakes. There's like stakes to it.
Yeah. You actually care. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're
Whereas
invested,
WWE program is like storylines.
Yep. Yeah.
Like, so like, I love the Hurt Business. I like them. Don't really know what they're trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
Okay. They're trying to get all the belts, and then what?
Yeah.
Then they're the Hurt Business with all the belts. Like what?
Yeah. What's next? Yeah.
There's no end goal. Like,
yeah.
I mean, now they're kind of doing the infighting. Like there's going to be a Shelton Cedric kind of split here.
Yeah.
That's kind of coming.
Yeah.
But like already, like I feel like they've only been around for maybe a year and we're already doing the infighting thing. And it's just like,
it's using again the same old storylines. Okay, we'll do infighting now. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So, well, we could talk about that forever. So, so my next question, which I think you're going to have a lot of fun with.
Okay.
Let's pretend that you are hired to teach a college course.
Okay.
And the college course is on professional wrestling as a whole. you have to make up the syllabus and the reading list. Give me like the 5 books that you're going to put on the reading list.
That is a good question.
You're allowed to cheat and look around.
Yeah, I have some books with me. So, well, I think we have to put the Mick Foley Have a Nice Day.
Okay.
I think we have to do that one. Let's see here. I like, this is the one I brought up. I actually should have had this one. This is the Unladylike book.
That's a great cover.
This is A Girl's Guide to Wrestling. That's by Heather Von Bannenberg. That's the one. So I think that one. I think Pure Dynamite.
I have that one.
I think this one too. This is a book. This came out in 1971, but it was reissued this year. This is Friday Night in the Coliseum.
Oh, cool.
It's a photo book. And Jeff Winningham took it. He kind of got unrestricted access to shows in Houston every Friday night. The promoter Paul Bosch let him, kind of backstage by the ring, could take all the photos. He even had a little recorder. He could interview the wrestlers. He could interview Paul Bosch, the promoter. So I think that's a good one too.
Let's add Keith's Too Sweet, the Indies book.
I think we have to have. I think we have to have Keith's. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that one I have here. It's behind me though. I think also this one, because Andre the Giant was such a character in wrestling. And if you go ask people who are not necessarily wrestling fans, Andre the Giant, they're like, yeah, like everybody knows Andre the Giant. There's so many.
All right, let's kind of, while we're still thinking about that, let's kind of diverge to a different topic on that topic. But so you just said Andre the Giant. Pretty much everybody knew who Andre the Giant was. Everybody knew who Hulk Hogan was.
Yep.
Stone Cold, The Rock. But if you were to go out on the street right now and ask 50 people who Drew McIntyre is, they probably wouldn't know.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Well, okay, so here's the theory on that. And I've heard this from different places. And one of them was actually Triple H in an interview. He roundabout way said, WWE will no longer build superstars. It's brand first, person second. Do you think that's a mistake?
I do. I think there is something to having these icons in wrestling, these memorable icons. I'd want to know more about what his thinking is, but obviously they want to make money. It's about lining the pockets first. No, I think it is, because I think that is a tragedy that if you went out there and even like asking people about Drew McIntyre, who is a great wrestler and has gone through a lot of highs and lows to get where he is today. I haven't watched the Stone Cold session interview with him yet, but no, I think it's a misstep. And I think it's important to fans to resonate with the superstars, like for them to mean something. Like Hulk Hogan, Macho Man meant something to me,
Yeah. I think it's because all of the people I mentioned kind of got ingrained into pop culture.
Yes.
Whereas it's hard for Drew McIntyre to get into pop culture because the WWE doesn't do anything to elevate him to that status.
Well, and there's only so many Marine movies you can sit through. So.
Right.
Which I don't think I've even sat through one. So
I haven't. Did you see the trailer that aired after TLC? That was the Icon series that's starting.
No, I was going to look at that. That reminds me, I didn't look at that yet.
It's essentially basically WWE's stab at Dark Side of the Ring.
Oh, that's interesting.
But now they're not all dark. So the 5 subject that they showed so there's going to be Lex Luger.
Okay.
But they were very much heavy on the fall of Lex Luger. Davey Boy Smith. Yokozuna.
Okay.
Rob Van Dam and Beth Phoenix.
Well, that's interesting. Speaking of Luger, I didn't enjoy his book either.
He had what? Was it a WWE produced one or a?
No, but to me, it just, how he was the character of the narcissist in WWE. It comes off very narcissistic, like he's in his bubble, and I think he more so today. I've seen a few interviews like recently where he's in a place where he acknowledges some of the mistakes he's made, but not in this book. In this book, it's everybody else did this. Like he doesn't take responsibility for anything. So even like,
oh, he's very Bret Hart. Bret Hart does that.
My fault.
Yeah. Bret Hart blames everybody, but I was. Oh man, I just lost. Don't you hate when you lose your train of thought?
I do.
I had such a good question, and the Lex Luger. We were on the Lex Luger thing. All right, I'll think of it in a minute. Did you want to add any books to the list?
I
remembered. I just remembered. Okay, that's good.
Let's go back to that.
Okay, let's go back to that. Especially because you've read so many books, autobiographies and stuff. Sometimes, do you think that not enough thought is put into matching the wrestler with the correct writer?
I think in some ways, I think sometimes wrestlers just want to get their book out. So I don't know if they always have an appreciation of what goes into telling someone's story, especially in book format. Like this is beyond an article. This is a whole book. And sometimes they're just, I just want to have a book so I can have it at my table at conventions kind of thing. So I think there is some truth to that. And then I think sometimes magic happens, like the Ric Flair book, like that. I don't think it would have been nearly as good without Keith Elliott Greenberg, connecting with Flair. Even the Superstar Billy Graham, Keith did that one as well. That's a great book. And they're both WWE books, which kind of is going to limit how much we say, how much controversy is going to be in the book to begin with. And so definitely in those two instances, like you had the right author with them. But
did you ever have any heat with anybody over one of your reviews?
I've had people like contact me but not getting that I've been threatened or anything like that. Like I've some people they didn't quite agree, but we talked about it civilly, and I'm very grateful for that nobody's been really upset about it. Like just recently I was on this question kind of got me in some trouble because I was on Kenny Casanova and John Cosper launched this Bookmarks COVID Con program, and now they have a weekly show. And I was interviewed on it, and I brought up how there was a review, not one done by me, and I couldn't remember all the details, but like an author objected to the review and actually sent in his own story, and it was published on Slam, and I couldn't remember all the details at the time. So the next day I posted the article on they have a Facebook page on the site that I did the show on. So just so people could know what I was talking about, because I felt bad I couldn't remember it all. And it caused a storm. Like people were like, this review is awful, because it was about George Shire, who wrote a book about the AWA. I haven't read the book, to be fair, but on a Slam writer slammed it, basically. He did not care for the book. And then, so this was 10 years ago, by the way, also as well. So at the time, George felt, he really did not like the review, did not feel it was fair. So he wrote an article, and I thought it was kind of a cool example to share with viewers, because I'd never seen that before, that a site that would actually say, okay, I just thought it was kind of a unique thing to share. And he didn't really appreciate that. So he wrote about it, and he got his own little story on the site. And that seemed to cause quite the reactions. But I thought it was a good discussion to have. It's got a lot of people angered up. And then George was on the same show I was the next week and got to talk about it again. So
look, I'm sure it pushed a lot that's and he was fine with it.
Well, that's that's the thing too. He got to be on the show the next week and got to draw attention to his book. And this book's been out for over 10 years. But to me, nobody's written a rebuttal review or a rebuttal article in response to review, but I have talked to people and had some discussions. And I mean, you get close to all these authors. Like I have to be in contact with so many of them, and so many of them, you become friendly with them. So it can be difficult, because I still have to have my integrity. I can't say every book is great, because everybody be like, geez, that Jamie sure likes every book. Whereas the same thing, I can't rip apart every book either. Like I try to have a balance. But and I still have to talk to these people, look at these people in the eye the next day, some of these authors. But so it's an interesting dynamic, but I also have to remain true to how I feel about a book.
Are you ever going to write a wrestling book?
I don't know. People have asked, and I don't know. There's part of me that would be interested in maybe releasing a fiction book, and maybe if the right subject came along for wrestling. I'm not opposed to it. I don't know. I don't know. I'm enjoying reading so many. I don't know. I know they're a lot of work too.
They
So,
are a lot of work, especially like the research, getting all the people, finding the people. Like some wrestlers are harder to find than CIA agents, like getting like any online presence or anything.
And I'd be interested in books on like Miss Elizabeth or Sensational Sherry, and both of whom are no longer with us. And, you know, I know in the case of Elizabeth, well, I don't know now. I know when I was in journalism school, I contacted her brother, and she'd already passed away at that point, to do a school assignment for journalism school. And he's like, I don't want to talk to you. My family doesn't want to talk to you. So, you know, that would be tough to do a book when there's, you know, the people closest to her, her family, looks like they don't really want much to do with wrestling. So,
right.
Yeah.
What wrestling topic do you feel needs a book?
I'd like to see a CM Punk autobiography. I'd like to see Miss Elizabeth, Sensational Sherry. I would say, like, a few years ago, the Sisterhood of the Squared Circle came out. Pat LaPrade and Dan Murphy did. So, like, there was kind of that women's book was missing, and I was glad they had that book out that honored all the different women in wrestling. So, I don't know. What books do you want to see?
You know, just recently, I don't know if there was a whole book involved in it, but I read an interview online with Gerald Briscoe about the last like days of WCW and the WWE takeover, and how him and Bruce Pritchard and Shane McMahon showed up at that last Nitro, and basically no one knew what was going on. And he said like there was like grown men crying, and like because there was this whole, and they basically got in. Shane did his thing on TV, and then they like left. So maybe like the final dying days, or maybe the one topic that I feel like really needs to be flushed out because it was such a missed opportunity, the invasion, and like WCW coming over and ECW and that whole thing and all of the things that could have been, and just the years of wrestling fans just making these fake things like, what if this guy wrestled this guy? And I know a lot of it had to do with the contracts and the AOL money and all that stuff. Yeah. But you can't tell me that whatever wrestler X made to sit home, you can't tell me that the money that the WWE had, they couldn't say, we're getting paid this to sit home. I'll pay you this to come to wrestle. And the amount of money that could have been made after that. But I feel like part of the problem was you have these guys and they're not going to want to put people over. They know they're going to get squashed when they come to WWE. And a lot of the guys did. The only guy that really survived was Booker T. Yeah. Maybe like one or two random others. Like some guys kind of hung on, like Shane Helms ended up being a producer and Billy Kidman stayed for a while. But I mean, the only person from WCW that really kind of moved on was Booker T. Booker T. Yeah. So I feel like maybe guys like Nash, Goldberg at that moment thought it's never going to happen. So I feel like that might be a good topic, like the invasion part, and just a real deep dive into either Dusty Rhodes or Sting. Like
and also Macho Man. I'd like to see.
And Macho Man. Yeah. But I feel like the Macho Man thing is just going to be mostly Lanny Poffo talking about him.
Which is forever. And I adore Lanny Poffo. I'm a big fan. I mean, as a teenager, I used to write horrible poetry and wish my poetry was half as good as the Geniuses. So I don't want to. I am, you know, just being a Macho Man fan, I adore Lanny as well. I've never met him, but I think he obviously has some bias. You know, that's his brother, and he loves him to death. And he, you know, when you've seen the documentaries and people are like on Dark Side or the WWE produced one, when they're talking about the negative aspects of the Macho Man Elizabeth's relationship, Lanny doesn't want to hear it, doesn't want to talk about that. But I mean, you also, there's something to be said for loyalty and family too. So you can't blame the guy, you know? Right. But yeah, it would need to be a book that had, you know, you want some Lanny input, but you got to have the other perspective too, the other side.
I agree. Real quick, before I let you go, the one thing that caught my eye when we first started talking, can we talk about the signed Honky Tonk Man? On your other.
I've got a whole collection of.
I find it interesting because you're such a Macho Man fan that you would have a autographed Honky Tonk Man. I mean,
This is all Honky Tonk Man figures. Like,
oh, they're all Honky Tonk Man?
well, from these 3 shelves here.
Oh, see, I can't see that. I can only see
Okay.
the signed
but I've got
picture.
This. So my uncle in Vancouver, who we would go visit, he would do things backstage for wrestling, like if take wrestlers to the airports. He also like run errands for them. He had to go get a giant pizza for the big show one time. He also did ring announcing. He would be timekeeper. He had to control the music, like entrance music, and then when the winner, their music or the things like that. Like he kind of did a bit of everything. He would collect robes sometimes.
Wow.
And so he got to know a few wrestlers, and one of them that he got to really know well was the Honky Tonk Man. So he had anytime he'd get something for Honky, he'd get it like an action figure, he'd get it signed. And actually, I'm trying to see if it's here. Oh, yeah, it is. When I got married, this little guy was put on my table in the middle by the candles. Like I had a sweetheart table, which is just me and my husband sitting together, not a big long guest table, but
right.
So this is in his finest white attire. It's a bit of a glare, I'm sorry.
Oh, I can see it, yeah.
Waiting for me at my wedding, because just any time a Honky Tonk figure came out, my uncle would buy it, and if he could, get it signed from Honky, because they knew each other, and then he'd send it to me. So I've amassed probably the world's only Honky Tonk Man collection.
Now, my final question as a father, I have a question. How do you keep your kid away from the packaged wrestling figures and stuff?
Well, he's 10. How old are your kids? Or
10 and 7. Okay. But like it's kind of like they're okay. Like you can't really see it. So I have Razor Ramon over here. Ramon over here. I have Bobby the Brain.
I see a Macho Man over that shoulder.
Yeah, this is one of my favorites. There's Macho Man. I got Xavier Woods and everything. Got a Road Warriors. They're okay with it, but like there was a point my son was like 6 or 7, and he was like, "Why can't they be out of the packages?"
My son's never asked that, and for when he was really little, I didn't have this stuff out. Like I kind of just more as he's been older brought it out. He's never asked me, so I've never had to have the "Don't Touch Mommy Stuff" collection. And he likes wrestling too, and I have gotten him a few figures of his own. Like I'm married to a ginger, so we're all big fans of Sheamus. So I got my son a little Sheamus figure, and his first wrestling show we took was a WWE one, and I got him a John Cena shirt and things like that. So he's never asked. So that's funny. I've never had to be like, "Don't touch mommy stuff."
I hope I didn't jinx you.
Now he's gonna be like, they'll be all opened all over the floor.
Yeah, playing with Honky Tonk versus Honky Tonk.
Yeah. You're like, New Mexican woman dies of a heart attack. Yeah.
So Jamie, where else can people find you online besides Slam?
Yeah, you can go to at Jamie Hemmings, and my name's spelled right here. It's Jamie. At Jamie Hemmings 1 on Twitter. And you can send me messages there, or jamie.hemmings.8@gmail.com. And like if there's a wrestling book that hasn't been covered on Slam that you think we have to, because I have this really ambitious goal. I want to put all the wrestling books on there. Okay. Even if they came out before. I know the producer gave me the same look, like, wow, that's great, Jamie.
Well, because it doesn't stop. Like
it doesn't.
Just because you're reading a wrestling book doesn't mean other wrestling books aren't coming out.
No, and especially like I said, with self-publishing, people are getting their stories and getting their books out, not having to rely on a big publisher picking them up. So if there's a book we haven't covered, you think we should, if you have a book coming out, let me know. That's the big thing too. I still have to chase a lot of books down. Like, please send us one. And I'm not the only one who writes about the books. I write a lot. I write about a lot of them, but I also have a lot of, there's many Slam writers who help me out. So I want to thank them too. It's not just me doing it all, because I couldn't, like you said, there's so many that come out. I couldn't read them all and still have my family life and all that stuff. So it's not just me, but let us know, because we want to cover them all, and I don't want to have to chase everybody. I mean, I still do it. I still try and chase down books all the time, but usually, you can get a hold of me at Jamie Hemmings 1 on Twitter, and also jamie.hemmings.8@gmail.com.
Well, you're the only writer that's ever come on here and asked for more work.
Well, I would just like it so I don't have to chase them so much, like dealing with all the publishers, like, please send the book, please.
Yeah, I hear you. I have the same problem.
Well, I love books. I mean, I'm so glad that Greg Oliver, the producer, gave me this role, and even he's like, oh my God, this is so suited for you. You're such a book nerd. So I'm just, if my 7-year-old self who was getting bullied for liking wrestling would know that, just a few decades more, you'd get to be a book editor and you'd be reading wrestling books for a living. I mean, how cool is that?
It's amazing, and I'm really happy for you.
Thank you for having me too,
Jamie. Thanks. We'll have you. I'll have you on again real soon.
Oh, I'd love to.
And that brings another episode of Not About Wrestling to a close. Guests of the Not About Wrestling show stay in their own damn houses. If you like the show, please share it on social or leave a review on iTunes. And remember to subscribe to Not About Wrestling on YouTube. Just go to youtube.com/BroBible and find the Not About Wrestling section. Thanks again for listening or watching, and see you all next week. Well, I won't see you at all. You know what I mean.